Womanjeka, and welcome everyone to this panel discussion on place, responsive art and performance now. I'm Dr. Tammy Wong Hulbert at RMIT University, Senior Lecturer of the Masters of Arts, Arts Management Program, School of Art, and lecturing in curating contemporary art. And I'm also an artist and curator and researcher and a member of CAST, who are the research group that are hosting this event. And we're a research group that focuses on contemporary art and social transformation. I'm also one of the artists from the Nagaric Al Maramu, Body of the Mountain, the exhibition that this panel discussion has actually evolved from. And firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we are here on the lands of the Wurrung and Bunurong language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations as the traditional owners on the unceded lands of which the university stands, and respectfully acknowledge their ancestors, elders past and present and emerging. And I'd like to respectfully acknowledge any First Nations people we have here with us today, Rheannan, of course. I'd like to welcome one of the co-curators of the exhibition, Dr. Gretel Taylor, an accomplished artist, dancer, researcher and curator with a deep interest in our relationship with place, site and environment through her practice. Gretel is also the founder of BodyPlaceProject, a platform for artistic, embodied and cultural experiences of place. So today, Gretel will be chairing this conversation with our panelist, Arahmaiani, who is actually online calling in from Indonesia, Vicky Hunter, who is calling in from the UK, and of course, Jill Orr, who's also in the exhibition, and Rheannan Port, who is also local and based at the VCA. Yep, excellent. I will pass over to Gretel.
Thank you so much, Tammy. And hi, everyone. It's really great to see you all here. Thank you so much for being here, to the panelists and our online audience, as well as in-person people. Welcome. I've been wanting for some time to bring together an international group of practitioners and thinkers to reflect upon the field of site-specific art and performance. There are, of course, many names to articulate these practices now: place-based, place-responsive, site-based, all of these variations. But to reconsider these practices now in relation to the world that we inhabit and create with and within. BodyPlaceProject's current exhibition, Nurikal Maramu, Body of the Mountain, has provided that opportunity. This event is actually a public program offering alongside the exhibition that I've curated with Gulshen Erza, who I think is still out greeting people who might be coming late, and Mandy Nicholson. So I wanted to just briefly tell you a little bit about that exhibition. Nurikal Maramu, Body of the Mountain, is an outcome of a mobile residency in which 8 artists walked together over 3 days across Koranwarrabul, the Dandenong Ranges, which is situated on Wurundjeri country to the east of Melbourne, Naarm. Those artists were Arti Jadu, Rebecca Murray, Mandy Nicholson, Jill Orr, Gulshen Erza, Lucky Sedaris, Gretel Taylor and Tammy Wong Hulbert. Walking together across Koranwarrabul, we shared artistic approaches and considered what it means to listen to country from our quite different perspectives and through our different art forms. We traced the range's gradients and gullies through shifting light and temperature, absorbed its changing atmospheres, and observed the life within its folds. We began to feel our bodies in a continuum with the body of the mountain. We were very privileged to have Wurundjeri traditional custodian and artist Dr. Mandy Nicholson as one of the group, who generously shared her cultural knowledge, guiding our way. Mandy also gave the exhibition its title, Nurikal Maramu, meaning body of the mountain in Woiwurrung language. And Mandy was programmed to be part of this panel, but she's unfortunately on sorry business at the moment and unable to join us. So I want to again express my condolences on behalf of all of the artists of BodyPlaceProject and this project to Mandy and her family at this time. So I'm going to show a very quick video to give a little preview of the exhibition that's currently open at Burringer Gallery in Upwey, Victoria, in the foothills of the Dandenongs or Koranwarrabul. It's on until the 13th of July. Do you make this happen? Thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that would still be great if any of you locally would like to go and visit the exhibition. It's on for another, several weeks. So that is at Burringer in the Dandenong Ranges. And yeah, I just wanted to then bring a bit of context or history around site-specific practice. It's now 44 years since the term site-specific was used by Richard Serra in relation to his tilted arc sculpture in 1981. Before that, even, artists such as Jill Orr were already creating performed actions well beyond the theatre or the gallery, and dancers were experimenting beyond the stage. And so site-specific performance emerged. But of course, First Nations performance has always responded through the body to land, to country, and its local ecologies. So by this definition, First Peoples were, the first site-specific dancers by a very long way. And this fact has been, slow to be acknowledged, I'd say, by the academy and artistic fields of site-based practice. With the current climate situation, much art being produced across all fields is of course turning to look at our relationships as humans to the non-human or more than human world. I think artists, if not governments, are really onto the fact that this is, the issue of our times. And so the time is ripe to revisit site or place-based practice. The project of refocusing site-specific performance is reflected, of course, in the much more massive project that is the Routledge Companion to Site-Specific Performance, edited by Vicky Hunter, who's one of our panellists, and Kathy Turner, that was published earlier this year. I've got a copy of it here on the table over here. I intended to have it in my hand, but I won't run over there just now. It's an epic achievement and wonderful contribution to the field that I encourage you all to get your hands on. Now that brings me to introduce our fabulous panellists. These will be way too brief introductions, but you can find the panellists' bios in the event information. So here in NAM, we have, as I just mentioned, Jill Orr, who has presented performance works in Australia and internationally since the late 1970s, producing iconic images reflecting an Australian perspective, drawing upon land and identities as they are shaped in, on, and with the environment. Rheannan Port is a Lama Lama, Ayapathu and Kuku Yalanji woman with over 20 years experience working within Indigenous arts and culture as a dancer, choreographer and educator. She's currently a lecturer in dance at the VCA, Victorian College of the Arts. And online we have, I can see Vicky, so I'll introduce you first. Vicky Hunter is a professor in sight dance at Bath Spa University in the United Kingdom, with many significant publications on sight dance, performance and arts, including the aforementioned Routledge Companion. And Arahmaiani is joining us from, is it Jakarta in Indonesia? Not sure. And you can tell us in a moment. Oh, Jakarta. Yeah, thank you. Arahmaiani is an internationally recognised artist, activist and writer, and a pioneer in the field of performance art in Southeast Asia since the 1980s. She's done projects and been based, focused on environmental issues based in Indonesia, China, Tibet and Germany. So we'll hear more about all of these amazing people in a moment. In fact, right now, I think it's really great to be here, and let's dive in. I wanted to do those introductions, as quickly as possible so that we can have as much time as we can for the discussion, because there's going to be a lot to talk about. I might start with you, if that's all right, Jill. I'm going to ask you, what were some of your sort of leading motivations in your earlier stages of your career that drove you or enticed you to work in relation to site or place?
Testing, did that work? Well, I grew up in Kyneton, and at the bottom, which is a little town on the other side of Mount Macedon in Victoria. And down the road was the Campaspe River, which I spent most of my time. I'd leave as early as I could to get out of the house, and my mother would call me to come home when it was dark. But there was a willow trees and eucalypts and a whole mix of colonising ecologies and native ecologies. But within all of that, there was a massive abundance of life. And in the winter, it would freeze over. And when it finally melted, the water would run crazy. And I remember once falling in and thinking, and anyway, I nearly, thankfully, a firm piece of long grass, I could get myself out. And I never told my mother. So that's that little bit. Then I went to art school, and the first thing that actually worked was a sculpture that was newspaper rolled end to end. So there were rolls of them, and it was in the foyer of the college that had lovely steps. Anyway, I let it go down like a carpet and thought, wow, how beautiful. This is really beautiful. But then all of a sudden the cleaner came, and with the most efficient movements possible, pegged it up and shoved it in the bin. And I thought, that's it. That is it. And I didn't know what the language for it was. I raced to my lecturer and said, it's happening. Anyway, I understood from that the dynamic of space can be changed completely in one singular performed moment. Not necessarily dance. He was a cleaner. You know, there was nothing conscious about him in affecting space. But I thought, oh my God, I think I better go and learn to dance. So I was doing a teacher's thing. I was never going to be a primary school or secondary school teacher. Anyway, so I failed the first 6 months. Then they said, we can't help you anymore. And I was off to Kahuna, and then finally found myself in Mildura. Now, this is a winding story. So the first performance that actually worked was actually in Mildura, and I was endeavouring to do life cycles. Now, at that point, even feeling the Indigenous underlay of everything, there were so many colonising layers on the top of it that to do this particular performance, I wanted to make a mound that I could create, you know, a life cycle of birth, and then there was a nest, and then there was watering trees, and yada, yada, yada. You get the idea. So it was all really earthy based kind of, I guess in those early days it was, you know, the taking the feminine spirit as life. But to my despair, the ground of this outdoor space in Mildura was so hard that I couldn't even get the shovel in it. I really tried. Anyway, and in despair, I said to the director, look, I just can't do it. What am I going to do? He said, don't worry, Jill, I'll get a bulldozer and we're making paths, so we're going to make a big mound. I said, oh, marvellous, thank you. So anyway, he made the mounds, but what I realised underneath, it was a rubbish dump. So all the Campbell's tins and all the rest of it were buried over this particular site, which at least it was a beautiful park of sorts. But that was the first performance that actually did work. It was the first performance that I had a sense there was audience with me. We were kind of on the same energetic page, and I use the word energetic willfully. And then I took from that. So, you know, when you're young, the lessons are thick and hard and really strong. So I took from that, because all these people took photographs of it, and I gave them to me, and I didn't know who took them or whatever, but I thought, I think I can do better than that. So I think my live performance work has always in my mind or in my imaginary it's like you're kind of making the image come to life. You're kind of from this imaginary state. It's quite filmic. Sometimes it's still images. Sometimes it's a series of dance moved images. But I attempt to kind of place that. So in terms of body and place, those images, it's the images that have come through the body into that liminal space between imagined, performed, and realised in a way. So then anyway, look, I'm going to leave it there. So that was the super beginning. That's enough.
That was a super beginning. Thank you so much, Jill. I hadn't heard most of those stories before, even though I've known you a long time. Now, I wonder, Arahmaiani, if you could answer something like that question. So what drew you in the earlier stages of your career? Because I know you've been, doing work since the 1980s. and what I know that your work is not necessarily about place or site specific, but that it involves working in that way sometimes. Just are you able to share a little bit about what issues were driving you perhaps in those early stages, what you were excited and interested and perhaps passionate about working with?
Okay, thank you for giving me the time. Well, yeah, when I started to create my artwork, the so-called artwork, at that time, it was being called experimental artwork because my kind of expression considered to be a bit strange. Anyway, I try to express my idea, but also question, yeah, because during my young time, I live in the era of the military regime time, and then they are beginning also project the so-called well, in Indonesian term, it's called pembangunan, means building up something, a new modern kind of style, which is, well, it sounds exciting, but at the other side, it's also looks risky. So I try to express also my question through the so-called experimental artwork. And I got into trouble because during that time in Indonesia with the dictatorial kind of system, people are not allowed to question anything. People just have to follow what the people in power, ordering you. Okay. So I was still very young. I was already in prison and also kicked out from the art school. But okay, I was actually already doing dancing and also painting since I was a kid actually, and because my grandpa also was a dancer, traditional dancer. Besides the so-called silat master is what is in English? Oh my God. Anyway, it's a traditional kind of fighting kind of style system. All right. So then I have to, after being released from the prison, actually I have to escape, because situation is very dangerous. And I got an opportunity to escape to Australia, to Sydney. And because, yes, I can do, express myself more freely. But of course, I have to work as well because, everything is much more expensive in Australia compared to my country. So I have to work, and I work in the market, the kind of community market created by the hippie community. And but yes, I got an opportunity to learn again about the forgotten cultural heritage from my ancestor. Because during that military regime time, the cultural heritage either forgotten or for especially Japanese traditional culture, also being manipulated for the sake of power by the elite. Okay. Anyway, of course, the hippie community, they have a library, and I can access some books and even have a discussion with some expert. And but of course, after a couple of years, I was really excited about doing research. So I decided to go back to Indonesia and doing research on the ancient sites. And yeah, it was so exciting for me. Although, of course, after, learning a lot, but then see the reality of what is happening under the military regime with this modern kind of ideology, I become confused, like, hey, there's something disconnect between the past and the present, So it's hard for me to, at the beginning, to try to connect it, because I want to see the connection, because yes, I connect to the past, but also the present, right? So you can see from my artwork, I mean, when I created an artwork that referred to this forgotten cultural heritage, I mean, I reinterpreted, of course, within the context of today's. But then, what happened? I got death threat from hardliners Islamists. They even, threatening to kill me. Wow, that was really scary. So that was after 10 years, after I was kicked out from the art school and released from prison. Then I got death threat. Oh my God, I had to escape again. I escaped to Australia again, to Perth this time. So thank you for all Australian friends who already, to protect me from, I might be killed, in that kind of situation. Anyway, so with that kind of background, I try to express myself through the so-called artwork, but also poem, and also a writer, right? And performance, of course. So everything is so mixed, and I don't care, I want to be free and express what I want to express. Yeah. At the beginning, everyone is like, call it, oh, this is experimental kind of artwork. Okay, I don't care. I don't worry about that as much as I can question. And then, okay, after going through that situation and learning a lot, of course, with the knowledge from the cultural heritage from my ancestor, I realized also how, with this modern system and lifestyle, that environment is not being respected, even being destroyed. Okay. And then after going through this kind of challenging situation where I was almost killed, then I realized if I want to really make a change in this problem of life, I have to work with others. That's where I begin to work with the community, creating the so-called community-based kind of art project. And it's still ongoing until today. And I've been working with the communities, not only in my country, but in various countries. Actually, in last few years, there are more and more young people, or community of young people, inviting me to work with them. And usually it's not a short-term kind of project. It's a long-term kind of project, because they also realize if we are talking about environmental issue, and also I suggest them to learn about this forgotten cultural heritage and connect this environmental issue with this forgotten cultural heritage knowledge. It needs time. And then also we need to connect one to another if we really seriously care about these environmental challenges today, right? So and I've been also teaching in the university, not in an art school, although I used to teach also in art school in China, for example, but also I've been teaching in Passau University in Germany. This is not an art kind of university or school. It's Department of Southeast Asia Faculty of Philosophy, because those people even in Germany, interested in learning about this cultural heritage from my ancestor. And of course, with the so-called, I mean, in German term, transdisciplinary approach. So yes, they have this kind of system where art, science, and philosophy being integrated, you know. But actually, with my ancestor kind of heritage system, this kind of approach already been practiced since thousands of years ago. I don't know if you heard about the Borobudur temple. It's the biggest Buddhist temple in the world. This is not just temple. This is something connected to art, science, or knowledge and philosophy. Yeah, being integrated. Okay, so I try to do my work with any people from all over the world. It doesn't matter what is their cultural background or faith background. I work with anybody, you know, especially how can we save our future? That's the main concern.
Yeah. That's a really great motivation, and I think that you know has motivated people in the past, but it continues to really. But maybe the issues are even more prominent today, and I think we'll move now to maybe maybe Vicky, could you perhaps kind of bridge from thinking about the kind of work that you've witnessed and written about through the last few decades, the kind of how the motivations might have shifted or become more urgent, or what sort of practices are you seeing now, and are they different to those previously? It's a bit of a broad one.
Vicky. That's a question. Thank you, and thank you also for having invited me to speak on this panel. I feel very humbled by the company I'm keeping, and very blessed to be in this company. So thank you so much. So the work that it's a really interesting question, because I guess the work that you write about or that you see shifting and changing is also informed by your own motivations, right? So, you know, what takes your eye and what interests you as a researcher, but also as a choreographer. And I was just thinking that for me, the work initially was driven by a concern for choreographic process and choreographic practice. Once dance was moved out of the theatre space, what were those tools? And I saw, particularly in the UK, a lot of work that was employing the proscenium arch kind of approach to making work that was very aesthetic and very beautiful. But it then led me to question, it's a very philosophical and academic question of what's the point? So what is the point of this work? What can it do? What can it reveal about space and place? So that's then extended to the work that I've been doing with Melanie Klertzl from Canada and Karen Barber from New Zealand, where we began to look at site-based or place-based dance and its potential to engage with and to bring to the fore some of these socioeconomic, political, cultural questions, and to start from local acts that then spiral out into global themes and issues. And it's interesting to think about the work in terms of where we are positioned globally. You know, in me sitting here in the UK in this kind of imperial colonialist space, and Karen and Melanie in spaces, colonized spaces. So that's kind of an answer to what kind of work have I seen, and has it shifted? So it's shifted in some ways, and in other ways not. I think there's a lot of work that is shaped by now the kind of festivalization and the event economy that the neoliberal kind of drivers for which are about productivity, audience numbers, and also this kind of consumption of culture. So for me, that there's one of your previous questions was about what are your concerns now? And I think for site-based work, that is one of my concerns now, that it's become another kind of, co-opted form in some ways for the festivalization and event economy. So on one hand, I see that kind of work going on, which is not the kind of work I'm interested in, but yet the kind of work that really draws into place-based engagements. There's a festival going on at the minute in Kent in the UK that's looking at the Thames estuary and conflicted and contentious and also celebratory relationships with that part of the UK coastline, which includes Tilbury Docks, which is a site of many migration stories to the UK, and also sites of political kind of turmoil and racism and questions about identity. So a lot of the work that's going on there at the minute, it's a festival that happens every 4 years. Because of the 4-year nature of it, I think it takes 4 years to really dig into working with communities, developing the work, getting the funding together. So place-based work, I think, is something that I've been increasingly more drawn to, in terms of perhaps sometimes not the most spectacular produced work, but it might be something that is a small act that has a real significance and really engages me as a viewer, as a theorist, as a writer. I hope that answers your question.
It's a great start. Thank you. Okay, and I'd love to hear now from Rheannan. How and why would you work with place, site, or country if you are, creating work?
So I'll start with the how. So my approach is place-based protocols as part of my practice. And just to give a little bit of understanding, I won't talk about the 60,000 years that I've inherited, but I will talk about when I was 6 years old. So just going off how you did your introduction. So I'm originally from Cape York Peninsula. I am a visitor on these lands. And I grew up on a remote country town, which is approximately 800 kilometres to the nearest regional city, which is Cairns. So very remote, central Cape York Peninsula. And there are about 300 people living in this town. And they're an amalgamation of 5 language groups that were all brought together by colonisation. So I was very lucky to have been brought up, immersed in my culture, and I've had parents who were, my mum was fluent in her language, Gugayalanji, yeah, growing up, my traditional lands is of land and sea country, so Lama Lama, Yintinjinka, and Ayapathu inland, so where the township of Cowan is located. And I'm also connected on my mother's side to the Daintree rainforest. So my traditional land goes from the Daintree rainforest to the reef, so the Great Barrier Reef, from both my mother and my father's side. So growing up in the remote community, I think I've always, and I'm still unlearning the word site, because site for me was when I saw these sort of fluorescent little tags in the bush that were pitched into the lands from people who were surveying the lands, or they were markings of or scarrings of when the mining took place in this township where I grew up. So site has always been a word that's associated with colonization, and so I never actually had that relationship with that word in the way in which I've heard tonight. I grew up and there was so much freedom, and I'm just thinking, I'm a mother of 2 now, and in the wet season, so we only had 2 seasons, wet season, dry season in the top end of Australia. And when the floods would happen, like we would go and swim in the floods. And I've got kids now and I'm like, no, like who sent, like we would go unsupervised down to the river with flash flooding and just swim. And we'd like dare each other who could swim across, and like, that's not cool. And so I think about my childhood, but I think about all the freedom I've had. And I think about how we just used to walk on country, walk in the bush. We used to improvise. We had, it was like I grew up in poverty and we didn't have anything. And so we just made use of, we had country and we just made use of anything that we found. We made clay weapons, we'd get the riverbed clay and we'd use sticks, and then, so we did so many things. And I grew up with my cousins, my siblings. I grew up with my uncle and aunties who were my age. So I had this really strong, deep connection to place based on my relationship with people as well. And so growing up, and, going with the old people and, connecting with country, like we would go at different times of the year, at different seasons, and collect bush foods, and so that has now come back into my my dance practice. They're the things that I go back to and revisit as my dance lexicon. So when I think about sight, I don't think about sight, I think about country, and I think about story, and I think about all those things that are interconnected with place. That are on country. And so all of so site specific isn't a thing that I've worked, like I'm still working through what that is for me, because site has always been story. And what I have the privilege now as a dance educator to teach in a subject at the Master of Dance at the Victoria College of the Arts. And what I get the students to do, both from here on this continent and international students, is to to transfer my knowledge of place-based protocols to them by exploring firstly the cultural events that have shaped these lands, the historical, both in Western and non-Western events, and social and political. And we look through, all of that before we start approaching the protocols of place. And so what I hope and for the students to be able to do is to respectfully collaborate with community and with the traditional custodians in a way that is deep and respectful as part of my place-based practice.
I think that's a really impactful way of working, is working with students and the next generations, and how we educate, and pedagogical sort of approaches going forward. Do you want to, I was going to talk about this a little later, but I'll jump forward to that. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about the sort of physicality of what that means, like with your students. I remember you telling me another time.
Yes, I actually had there's a student I had in my inaugural year for the Master of Dance is here tonight, and colleagues. So it's nice to see you all here. How would I start this? This was. Yeah, bare feet. I think firstly understanding, I use positionality as a way for all of us to understand that we are all visitors here. If we're not traditional custodians, we're all guests, we're all visitors to this land. And in order to find out what our practice is, we have to go through a process of interrogating our personal and our cultural identity in order as an inroad into who we are. And that is something I learned from a dance anthropologist in the States, Dr. Halufu Osamari, when I attended a conference as part of my Master of Dance, Master of Fine Arts back in 2019. And it's from that being able to position myself and getting the students to go on that journey to find what their positionality, it's then we have that idea of, well, where we are and whose voices is, or whose voice it is to speak about that particular topic or that particular on the topic at that place. So positionality, I look at intersectionality also. So we do a big exploration on those two knowledge systems so that students actually know who they are before they step on these unceded lands. And also when we step on these unceded lands, we're also occupying this space and who, like, so yeah, there's a whole, it's 12 weeks of learning. It's something I really can't talk about in a few minutes. So yeah, but it's just layering, and also being able to, it's a delicate conversation with students, and yeah, it's also encouraging students that yes, you know that there is a way for collaboration on these unceded lands, and it's just working through those challenges. But yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know it's a lot to try to share in a short amount of time, but I think it's really exciting that you are there teaching at VCA dance, where I went for a year or so a long time ago, and it did not include anything like that. And yeah, I think that it's a sign of something good happening in the world. One small thing, but one very important thing. Yeah. Jill, I wondered if you want to talk a little bit about teaching, because I know that you've done a lot of that in your time, and how we are, teaching and training the next generations to consider place-based practice.
Well, this is a great segue from you, because my teaching occurs mostly in Ballarat, which is regional, and there's a whole mix of people, from farmers to everybody else, a broad mix of ages, diversities, and so on. So I co-taught a subject with theatre students and visual arts students, and we really wanted primarily an Indigenous voice to really ground it, the work as it evolved, and that exact thing of like, how do you know, particularly as a non-Indigenous person, where we're from? And it's quite confronting. And so we were given the structure to say, who are you? Why are you here? How long are you staying? And what will you leave, and what will you take with you? And so those questions could go really deep into, I'll just use myself as an example, really. So through my own practice, I had to, it was those questions. So, the surface of any place, but particularly for me in Australia, has always had that feeling there's just this powerful ancient culture underneath it. I could feel it. But how do I feel about my presence here? So I had to really get real and say, okay, well, my ancestors were gold miners, tin miners, and they were also missionaries. So, I mean, really, probably the greatest destructors of environments and Indigenous culture. Yep, that's where I'm from. But what really deeply understanding that, and I learnt that through making artwork about it, that took me on that sort of journey, that I know where I'm from. So I can say, as I enter a land, who I am and why I'm here and when I'm actually going to go. But that was powerful, because there was sort of, for example, one student, a mature age student, was a farmer, and she absolutely freaked out. She said, but, we so it really, that process brings up very, very deep feelings, but going through the other side of it, is this amazing opening, and it is amazing connection with everybody in this process.
Sure. I wondered if Arahmaiani and Vicky, if you want to add anything about, I think you both probably are involved in teaching students at university, tertiary level. Would you like to add anything about what you think is important to impart to students about making work in relation to place or country? Either of you, jump in. Okay, I'll tell you. How about you, Arahmaiani?
All right. Yeah, so I've been teaching in the university in Germany, in Passau. Yeah, most of the students are German, but there are also students coming from other countries as well, as they receive grants. Yes, it was so interesting because it's not just about teaching, it's also about me learning about, you know, other culture and other country situation, right? And in regards to environmental issue, I think today in any part of the world, everybody is already experienced the impact of climate change, right? So that's why we are also working together to deal with that problems, not only in Germany, but also in Indonesia and Southeast Asia countries, because there are many students coming from this area studying there. And yeah, this is something, if we're talking about sites, that we need to do research before we are doing something necessary, yeah? Because we need to develop a kind of, I will call it creative strategy in dealing with the challenges, you know, because yeah, the environmental issue is not just about environment, but this is also connected to the economic system, social, political, right, issues. So how can we somehow bring this realization that everything is actually connected one to another, and to make people or the community aware also about this kind of situation, and then they come up to a realization that yes, we need to do something together if we really want to make a change. Yeah, so that's something that I learned a lot from my work with communities from all over the world, actually. And I try also to connect one community to the other. Even if they have different cultural background or faith background and different environmental situation, so they can learn from each other. They can share the knowledge with each other, right? And this is really good for each other. So I have a kind of hope then, you know, for the future after working in this kind of way. Before that, I was quite desperate, you know, after in prison, get death threat, and then, nothing happened, yeah? And I was desperate, and even there was a time when I was thinking about committing suicide, you know. But anyway, so I'm so happy to work with many people from all over the world. It gives this really strong sense of hope for the future.
Absolutely. Okay. Actually, Arahmaiani, could you think of and briefly describe one of your projects or a performance or an artwork that you've made with the community, perhaps about climate or environmental issues?
Yeah, so one example, the project that I consider successful so far is the one that I have been doing up in Tibet Plateau. you know, Tibet Plateau is known as Asia Water Tower. It's the source of water for about 2 billion Asian in Asia continent, but because of climate change, is under threat of drying out. So that's why I work up there since 2010 and still ongoing until now. And fortunately, after 5 years working up there with the condition that I was not allowed, or we were not allowed to get any support or funding from abroad, from outside, I mean, because, you know, Tibet is under China, yeah? But then after 5 years, the Chinese government approved and support the project, even until today. So then also what is so good, that's what I have learned a lot from this experience, that with this focus on environmental issue, and this is about, you know, helping all beings, right, to be able to survive. So then the Tibetan and the Chinese, they can come up together and work together. While before that, when they're focusing only on political issues, right, they become like enemies. And the elite in power, of course, they manipulate it, like happening everywhere, right? Yeah, so that's one example of the successful kind of project where I can learn a lot from that experience, how to bring people together, you know, and not just follow what the dream of the elite, usually just thinking about power and money, right? Anyway, I was also doing another project actually, but this is a little bit sad kind of story. Before the war happened between Israel and Palestine, I was working with the community organization of environmental activists from Israel and from Palestine. The member of the, for example, organization from Israel is more than 1,000, while Palestine around 300 members. But they really want to work together because they realize that they need to change this situation. And they say, sorry, for the men, they say, we don't want to follow male kind of ambitions. We want to build a new, better future for our younger generation, for our kids. So the plan is to plant the olive trees on the border side, you know, together, and bring the kids also joining this project. But unfortunately, before the project started, the war, started. So sad. So sad.
That is incredible, though, that you were right there working in that crux of the conflict zone, or that became the conflict zone. Thanks, Arahmaiani. Amazing to hear about these really global conflicts and dire scenarios, really. Vicky, do you want to talk about how the immediacy of global heating and climate catastrophe is affecting place responsive practice in various different projects, or just from your, I guess, writing and editing of lots of different practitioners' work. Is there perhaps, how do you want to talk to that a little bit? Is that enough?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. It is a concern, sure, in this field for a lot of artists and makers. And in the book, which I do have a copy of here, just to hold it up. There we go. We have a whole section on projects from artists, from theorists, writing about climate crisis, global heating, and there's a fabulous chapter in there by Laura Levin and Juma Pari, who are talking about, I'm just writing it down here, hemispheric dialogues, and thinking about air and air quality as an artistic project that responds to deforestation. So it's definitely something that artists are engaging with through a lot of artists that are engaging with community groups. There's, you know, the practices of kind of parachuting in and making community arts-based projects is diminishing, and there's a kind of shift towards bottom-up activism facilitated through creative arts inquiry that helps to give voice to local communities, and also those cultural practices that are gradually being lost. There was a wonderful project, talk about a project I went to recently about fishing traditions in kind of neglected areas, underserved areas in the UK, where because of global changes, the fishing industries have been affected. But along with that are craft traditions, oral traditions, storytelling, songs. So how to capture some of this cultural heritage before it goes. So cultural heritage and climate change are intrinsically linked in many of the projects that are written about. And yeah, what else do I want to say about that? Yeah, but there's something that when you kind of posed these questions earlier, I was thinking about, and I was thinking about how to translate. So these pieces, these works, these projects are impactful and powerful, but how are those legacies, or the legacies of those projects, how are they then transformed or translated into pro-environmental behaviour? And that's kind of where my thinking is at the minute with a project that I'm hoping to develop. Whilst again, I keep going back to economics and global economics and notions of reciprocity between humans and non-humans, informed by feminist materialist thinking. But how do we change a lot of people are engaged in environmental activities, you know, wild swimming's a thing, people are hiking, people are engaging in nature spaces and having a love of them. But then how can the arts, or how can arts inquiries help to translate that into pro-environmental behavior? There seems to be a bridge between people consuming, engaging, enjoying nature spaces, but then not really shifting into pro-environmental behaviors. So I'm interested in what place-based practice can do. What is it that drives artists, makers, movers in nature spaces? And is there something within that practice that can inform behavior change, pro-environmental behavior change? So that's kind of a circuitous route round to my thinking from my own perspective on what, again, going back to that question of what can this work do? What does it do? How can it do it? How might it shift behavior change?
I think that's really kind of where it's going. Yeah, it is a kind of frustration, I guess, that's maybe emerging now among practitioners that, and also theorists are pointing out, you know, that there's dire situation at hand. And as Melanie Klertzel cites art activist John Jordan, who refers to the trap of representing the world rather than transforming it. And that provocation is that, you know, the time for images, more performances about the crisis has passed, Klertzl suggests, instead of focusing on attending to the site in order to research and develop our art. The suggestion is that we reorientate our practices to tending to the site. What does the site need from us? That's a kind of summary of some of what Melanie Klertzl was on about in her chapter in the book, Site Performance, Coloniality and the Climate Crisis. So I'd like to use that as a provocation for you, the panelists. You know, how can we bring the needs of place to the core of what we do? And how do these provocations kind of sit with you? What are your responses?
First, I was thinking you need to give time. You give time to time so that it really, wherever one may be, one can feel it through the earth, the feet, up through the body, in relation to everywhere. That positionality that you were speaking about. That, but then, as we can see, it just takes a few drones and a whole city is blown to bits. So I don't know that we have time. So I'm just speaking about a conundrum that I actually don't know how to answer. It's a as we witness here in relative peace, we do have that hopeful energy. I totally think hope is a powerful imaginary, because unless we can go forward into something we can maybe see or we can maybe feel, we're stuck. So, yeah, look, your question that Gretel sent out quite some questions, and it was the one about, you know, the most global, the conflict in our globe, let alone climate change, which of course is the underlying thing. But I thought, because I've done works, but they've, in a sense, they've been a reaction to something that's happened, but it has been, in a sense, within an Australian political sense. It could be extrapolated to be relevant, globally relevant, but it actually has come from being here. And I'm just going to flip that and say I completely see that interconnectivity with people, and that is the most powerful thing. Okay, the world's blowing itself up in male dominant. Let's you know, we know all that stuff, but basically it's kind of working underneath it, isn't it? It's sort of like the most radical act kind of sits underneath and does not die. I know the image. It sends its roots deep and far, and they interconnect with everything. That's where I'm thinking I can say as an image that maybe from those roots bring a new life. But, you know, here's these places that have been shattered or are being killed via climate change. But the underlying belly, that's the fire we're kind of nurturing, I think. And we all have our different way of doing it, but it is that interconnection with people in a quiet way, perhaps. Because you're right that, you know, going rah-rah political kind of is it's been done and it's not productive. So thinking roots, that's where I'm going.
Thank you so much, Jill. Rheannan, do you want to try to respond to that, or to this kind of provocation of tending to the place and placing the place at the core of what we do, and that care for country, if you like?
Absolutely. So just I'm just going to bring it back from global to more of a local perspective, and so yeah, caring for country. And I think caring for country for all of us on this continent is caring for ourselves first and foremost, and creating works that actually nurture and heal the land. And so there are things that we need to think about. There's grief, there's trauma that this land and this country carry and hold in those stories, but also we work towards joy and justice as part of our site-specific work or place-based practice. So yeah, mine is constantly weaving those parts of truth-telling into my dance practice, and I think that's something that we all need to take that responsibility. And like Arahmaiani mentioned, you know, it's such a privilege to make artwork, and not everyone has that privilege. And so we do have a responsibility in making artwork, and making artwork that matters. Otherwise, we're just wasting our time and wasting other people's time.
True, thank you. And yeah, I guess it's emerged already, the intertwining of the colonization and extractivist kind of tendencies and really dominance that's causing so many of these dynamics in the world. So how can we, nurture a sense or a practice of working with care and solidarity with First Peoples, responsibility to disrupt colonial power dynamics and these extractivist tendencies? It's a big question. Anyone want to answer it?
I think, sorry, do you mind if I answered it? I think for me, the extraction part is also transactional. So we have to move beyond transactional relationships and have deep and meaningful relationships when we collaborate with community and with country. So I think, and also time. Time has an effect on how we, our interactions, our relationships, but also our processes. So often we're working in such a tight frame, frame, and that we're making mistakes, particularly when we're collaborating and working within the Indigenous space. We're so focused on the outcome and the performance that we're not taking accountability for the process. And within that process, often our more hurt and are being hurt. So, and we're not finding time to address that, because as we do in the colonizers way, we just continue moving forward and we never come back to having those deep and meaningful discussions about time and processes as part of our practice.
It's a really good point, actually, and I'm hearing that and feeling that from several of the responses. That we need longer processes. We need to work slowly with communities and with places over time. And yes, that mention of the kind of festival model as well that Vicky brought up. There's there's all of these constraints that are and pressures for outcomes. It's not so conducive to really make work that is meaningful and does care for people and country. We've got to round it up pretty much soon, so I'd like to invite questions from the audience or from the online community that are, I think, out there. I can't see who's out there. Yeah, there's a few online, I think. So thanks for being there and for listening. Do you have any questions for our panelists? Maybe we need a microphone to go to you. I can just give you mine.
Thank you. I have a question. I did think about this before I came, but it also leads off from what you were just speaking about. And it was, how do you consciously work with slowness or de-acceleration in your practice? And I'm really interested in what we actually do, or how we might systematize that when the invisible architecture is really pressuring us otherwise. Yeah.
Great. Who would like to talk about slowness?
Mm.
I don't know whether this will be it, but indeed, being project endpoint focused was okay. But in a way, whether you could take the time span to include a lifetime of practice, perhaps that's one way of looking at it. But what I was really going to say was perhaps the most recent work alongside our Burrung cultural work, the Body Place Project, was one that was near to me. It's near to where I live. It's in the bush, but city bush. It's in a billabong. And that project was super simple. I didn't want an audience. I just keep it light on the ground and just go and do this little eccentric thing. And but it took about 3 years to do. And the reason why it took 3 years to do was because I started with one kind of gesture and then the whole place was flooded. So you just could not go anywhere near it. So I waited for the waters to subside and I knew it dried out so much that I knew what was underneath. If that's cool, but so I then had to wait for a little bit more water to come back. And then I worked in collaboration with Christina Simons, who was photographer, and I, did the stuff. I'm the closest to myself, so it's me that does it. So she then hurt her knee. So I then had to really calm down. And then I got these new dogs and they banged into the back of my leg and I sprained my wrist. So I had to recover from that. So meanwhile, this is going tick, 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 2 years, nearly 3 years. So then finally all conditions were right. The body was working, her body was working. We got it done. So that was enforced taking time. But I'm glad I did because I actually it forced me to really, and you probably can't even see it in these images. They're actually irrelevant. What was really amazing was it made me really look and really feel that place. And I'm so grateful of that. And the outcome, really, it's not so important. But it kind of showed me that actually the place you're in, or for me anyway, is to start the place of that deep engagement and observation. And that's what I thought to say. Would you like to come?
That's great. Thank you, Jill. There look like there's a couple more questions from the online people. Yeah. Do you want to choose one, Tammy?
Sure. Okay. Karen Berger actually says, I'd love to hear about a specific example of an artistic work that had an outcome of caring, curing, not only highlighting a problem, and a bit about what it was about, the process that made this possible. Thanks for a great discussion.
Does anybody have a particular example of an artwork or a project that had this kind of outcome? We're all aspiring to it. It's just on the horizon.
I'm sure there's so many examples.
It's hard to actually cure something, isn't it?
Can I just chip in with some thoughts on that? Because I think that the two comments that are in the chat actually kind of dialogue with one another on that. because the second comment is commodification of culture does not work, and we need whole systems change. So in a way, I guess looking to an art process or an art product as something that cures is again a form of commodification in a way. I think, as you say, we work towards it, but it's much more intersectional. And I'm using that term in terms of a systems-based change. I've been doing a lot of work recently on the pluriverse and thinking about pluriversal approaches. So the role of the artwork might be as a catalyst, as a provocation, as an exemplar, but in and of itself, unless, alas, in our current global matrix of power, as Walter Mignolo talks about, and unless there's a dialogue with a community, but also policy and systems, unless we look at the systems that we are embroiled in and interconnected in, then art alone or an art product alone it is not going to help bring that about. But it might, going back to Jill's talk of the deep roots and the underbelly, it might just start to mesh things together in some kind of way, in a positive way. So that would be my response to those 2 points that are in the chat there.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Vicky. Yes.
Oh,
yeah, thanks. You don't need to come out unless you want to. You can
Okay,
come out.
no, I'm good. Thanks for the wonderful conversation. I wanted to ask, especially referring to what Rhee said before, have any of you had the opportunity to go back to a site that you have worked with, finished working? Because in the process, we take a lot from the site and we learn. And to revisit, and then perhaps if something has changed or you have realized if some curing has happened, or I don't know, has going back to a site ever impacted your process?
I just wanted to say that I went to One Tree Hill more than once to do work.
Yes, well, Tammy, you should be one of the panelists as well.
I can make a little bit of a comment.
Go on.
Yeah, just at this particular site in Tremont, which is where we walked actually. I had already done a site-specific performative community-based work, which was actually responding to the windstorms of 2021. And we actually worked with local writers to actually write to the fallen trees of the area, and we created a soundscape, or it was a performance work, but also a soundscape based on that. And so I felt like I really knew that site in a particular way, and was really connected to it through the history of that site. And I'm also a local resident in that area, so that site actually connects right to from my backyard to the hill there. And then when we went for the walk, we actually went straight back through that place as well, and that gave it a whole another layer of meaning, being there with especially with Mandy, and just we spent time there actually writing and drawing as a group, and that was really, nice to be engaged in conversation with the artists around, and it gave it a totally different reading of the place as a creative place, and didn't have that emotion that was attached to the first time around that we were there performing. And then for this project, I actually went back to that site again and actually produced more personal work, which did actually reflect on my positionality and my contribution to the exhibition. My background is I'm Australian Chinese, with sort of 5 generations here in Australia. So I really, because we spent so much time thinking about what country means to Wurundjeri people, and I got really fascinated by my own, what's a sense of country for me, like as someone that's a migrant that feels like they've completely lost their connection almost to my cultural heritage, and it was lost in my family where our ancestral village was. But I was all through the pandemic, I was being a super sleuth and investigating that relationship, and I actually went there as part of this project. Actually, I went to the ancestral village and tried to bring, because that's also that site on One Tree Hill is also near where I live. It's the area that I have spent the last 15 years, but I just wanted to sort of bring those two ideas of home into one site. Yeah, and that's how I interpreted that idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and while you're talking about the Dandenongs, which is Koran Warrable is the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung name for it, it made me think in terms of this question about a process or a project that cured something. It didn't. There's been many art projects in Koran Warrable, across Koran Warrable, by different artists and different communities since that really severe windstorm in 2021 that decimated a lot of the trees in the area, and it really changed the landscape. So for those of us living there, it was shocking and scary, and also kind of uncanny, because you're living in a place that suddenly is different, and it was a climate related phenomenon.
Yeah.
So, but really, I would say that not that anything is cured or resolved about that, but through all of these community-based art projects, there has been a sense of people coming together and at least a sense that as a community we've felt and worked through that, and expressed that grief to the trees, yeah.
Any other
questions?
So much. We have 5 minutes.
Yes. Is there another question from anyone in the space, or do any of the panelists have anything further that you want to add, or feel that it should be brought up in this conversation, responding to each other perhaps? It's very quiet. Maybe everybody's hungry for dinner. Or breakfast, as it may be.
Maybe.
Yes, everyone at different time zones. Look, I think that might be a good time to wrap it up. I just also wanted to. Yes, Dan.
Did you? Oh,
thank you. Just two thoughts that haven't formulated into questions yet. The first thought is like, so when people are doing the place to connect to the place, why do you think it's important for the artists or researchers to know where they come from? Two is that the second thought is obviously we all have different ways to respond to the place and connect with the place in this creative process. I'm curious to hear what different process, the process people use to initially to connect with this place, especially when the place is not somewhere we're familiar with. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Really great question. Rhiannon, that'd be great if you would like to describe how you connect with the place.
Yeah, so I'm just going to share a little bit of background about my dance lineage. So I grew up dancing my traditional dances, and that was stories that I learned through the old people who have now passed on into the spirit world. And then I moved away from the remote Aboriginal community that I grew up in and went to an all-girls Catholic boarding school. And then after that, I joined Naisda Dance College. And the thing that I reflect on about going to an all-girls Catholic boarding school is the rituals. Like, I so enjoyed rituals and routines. And I really enjoyed the prayer groups because we were always holding space for other members of our community at the boarding house, and, holding space to share those thoughts of those who were going through difficult times at that moment. So through the discipline I learned through Catholic boarding school, and then joining Naisda Dance College, that really gave me the tools to move interstate at 18, away from my community and my network system, and learn. And this was the first time I got to be with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from all around, different places, different communities. And so we came together, and the core part of NAISDA dance training is learning about cultural dances, traditional dances from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. So the foundation of my dance knowledge and experiences comes from my community, my parents' NAISDA Dance College, where I graduated, and then Bangara Dance Company, which formerly you would have heard as Bangara. My time at NAISDA and Bangara, I got to travel to remote locations in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and learn songs and dances from elders and traditional custodians whose culture had not been broken. So that continuation of knowledge transmission passed down from one generation to the next. So after, like, that has been the core of my training and understanding of dance and dance cycle, dance ceremony. Then I had the opportunity to join Bangara as a professional dancer for 4 years, and that I travelled across this continent and across the globe. And that was an amazing opportunity to be ambassadors for our people on an international stage. A highlight of my dance career was back in 2000 when I got to work with many different Aboriginal language groups coming together for the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games opening and closing ceremony. And that was an amazing time because it was the first contemporary or first event that brought together many different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander language groups and cultures and storytelling together for this huge international event. And so when I think about site-specific work, and I knew that there was the thing about the example, because of how I have told stories of and for this country from an Indigenous worldview, site and going to a particular like a location on this continent, it's not, for me as an Indigenous person, it's not something that I go, oh, there's a tree or there's a river. I don't feel I have those hereditary privileges to go and start performing and responding to that particular site without the invitation of the traditional custodians, because my relationship to this land is very different to non-Indigenous peoples. There are protocols of place, there are law that comes with that as well. And so having had been immersed in my cultural, my culture growing up, and then going to NAISDA Dance College, and then Bangara Dance Company. Throughout my 20-year career, I have had a very different understanding of site-specific work. And I know there was like an example. It's very hard to give an example because it is such a journey, and it would take much longer than a few minutes to answer those questions because they're quite complex.
Okay, thank you so much, Rheannan, and all of the panelists. I think we need to wrap up now. It's just after 7 o'clock. So really like to give a big thank you to all the panelists and to Tammy for introducing, and to CAST for having us. And I should also acknowledge that BodyPlaceProject is very grateful to be supported by for this project by Yarra Ranges Council and Nurek Burring, and assisted by the Australian Government through Creative Australia, its principal arts investment and advisory body. So thank you so much to our online panelists, Arahmaiani and Vicky Hunter. And to Rheannan Port and Jill Orr, who are here. Thank you. And to our wonderful audience, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for coming.
All right.
I was just going to mention that we do have food and drink, so you're welcome to stay for a bit and have a chat to us. And also we have a copy of Vicky's beautiful book there. if you'd like to have a look. And also that we do have some information available at the front as well about the current exhibition if you're interested in knowing a bit more about where that is. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.